towards the door of the bedroom that is caused by likely something.
They were kids, some still in middle school, others barely old enough to understand what life in prison even means. But one choice, one night, one violent act, changed their lives forever. From a 10-year-old who shot his own father to a 12-year-old sentenced to die behind bars, these are the youngest criminals ever sentenced in court. Their stories expose the thin, fragile line between childhood and crime and force us to ask the question, how young is too young to face adult justice? This is Court Moments, and these are the cases that shock the world. Section 1, Franklin Williams, the Gagged Defendant. This is Franklin Williams, a convicted felon from Cleveland, Ohio, who made national headlines for what might be one of the most chaotic courtroom moments ever caught on camera. Williams had already been found guilty of multiple armed robberies, fleeing police, and a high-speed chase that endangered several lives.
Saying freedom of speech, no duct tape. Your Honor, I ask today, Your Honor, that I receive the lightest sentence that you can give me.
His record was long, but nothing compared to what was about to happen in front of the judge. After nearly 30 minutes of constant arguing, the judge finally had enough. She said, "I'm gonna gag you in 1 second." Williams smirked and kept going. He's currently serving time in an Ohio state prison, known less for his crimes and more for one of the most bizarre courtroom moments ever recorded. A man literally silenced by justice itself. But the next story involves someone just as unpredictable, a woman who lived under a fake identity for 25 years before brutally turning on her coworker. Section 2, Kimberly Kessler, the hairdresser with 17 identities. This is Kimberly Kessler, a woman whose entire life was built on lies. For over 25 years, she moved from one state to another, Pennsylvania, Kansas, Ohio, and Florida, adopting at least 17 fake names. Each new identity allowed her to vanish into another life before anyone could figure out who she really was. When police found Kessler, she was already on the run.
You said, I refuse the public defender's office. They appointed Jordan Beard, Jolene Fleming's cousin, as my public defender.
In her car, investigators discovered Jolene's blood, her DNA, and scissors, consistent with the injuries found. But the investigation revealed something far deeper, something no one could have imagined. Kessler wasn't Jennifer Seibert. When police confronted her, Kessler denied everything. In fact, her behavior became more bizarre by the day. Inside her jail cell, guards said she would scream for hours, throw feces, and refuse to shower. To this day, Kimberly Kessler continues to deny everything, still claiming she's the victim of a government conspiracy. Her story remains one of the most bizarre and chilling cases in Florida's criminal history, a tale of obsession, deception, and a descent into madness. But next, we move to a quiet town in South Carolina, where a teenage boy's desperate attempt to hide the truth set an entire house ablaze. Section 3, Jacob Morgan, the teen who burned his own brother. In Rock Hill, South Carolina, a quiet neighborhood was shaken one early morning in March 2015, when flames tore through a small family home. Inside that home were two brothers, 17-year-old Jacob Morgan and his baby half-brother, Joshua Hill, who was just 14 months old. By the time firefighters arrived, the house was engulfed in flames.
From underneath that child towards the door of the bedroom that is caused by likely something. It's a significant burn pattern as he described it. It could have been alcohol, it could have been something else that gets consumed by the fire, but a significant burn pattern shows that there is something said significant and intentional. And at that point, to start a fire and then...
Neighbors stood outside, horrified, as Jacob sat on the curb, crying and screaming for help. Detectives went back to question Jacob. At first, he stuck to his story. But then, as the evidence piled up, his emotions began to shift, from grief to panic. When police told him they found no sign of forced entry, Jacob broke down. I want to see how long it takes before anyone notices. During the trial, the prosecution painted Jacob as a disturbed young man seeking attention through chaos. The defense argued he was emotionally immature, a kid with developmental challenges, not a killer. In his final statement, he said softly, "I wish I could take it back. I didn't mean for him to die." Jacob Morgan will spend the rest of his youth behind bars, haunted by the fire that took his brother's life. But the next case is even more disturbing because it involves a child so young that his hands could barely hold the weapon he used. Section 4. Jordan Brown, the 11-year-old who shot his father's fiancée. It was February 20th, 2009, in the small town of Wampum, Pennsylvania. A quiet morning, the kind you'd never expect to turn into a national headline. Inside a modest country home, 26-year-old Kenzie Hauk, 8 months pregnant, was preparing for her day. Minutes later, a single shot rang out. Kenzie's 4-year-old daughter, Adeline, ran outside crying, telling workers in the nearby driveway, "Something's wrong with Mommy." When police arrived, they found Kenzie lying on her bed, dead from a single shotgun blast to the back of her head. But then detectives started piecing together the timeline. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen items. Jordan spent years in juvenile detention as his case moved through appeals. Then, in 2018, nearly 9 years later, something shocking happened. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned his conviction, citing lack of solid evidence. After almost a decade, Jordan Brown walked free. By then, he was a grown man, released at 21 years old. He rarely speaks about what happened, but to this day, many still wonder, was Jordan a victim of a broken justice system? Or a child who got away with murder? But our next case pushes the limits even further. Because the killer was so young, he still believed in Santa Claus. Section 5. Mary Bell, the 11-year-old girl who became Britain's youngest killer. In Newcastle, England, the year was 1968, a time when kids played freely in the streets, and nobody imagined danger could come from one of their own. No one took it seriously until it happened again. Just 2 months later, on July 31st, another boy, Brian Howe, only 3 years old, was found dead in a vacant lot. This time, the killer had been more deliberate. Brian's body had been strangled and marked with scissors. Police were stunned. What kind of monster would do this to a child? Then came the twist. When questioned, she lied confidently until police found her fingerprints on one of the crime scenes. And when they searched her notebook from school, they found a chilling entry. In childlike handwriting, it read, "We did murder Martin Brown. It was an accident." Mary became the youngest girl ever convicted of killing in Britain. She served 12 years in a secure facility and was released at age 23 under a new identity. She later became a mother and even won a legal battle for lifelong anonymity. He said, her eyes, they were empty, like she didn't understand what she'd done or maybe didn't care. But our final case takes everything you've just heard and makes it look almost ordinary. Because this last one, it's a story of a child so young, the world didn't even know how to punish him. Section 6. Cristian Fernandez, the youngest person ever charged with murder as an adult. It was March 14th, 2011, in Jacksonville, Florida, when a quiet neighborhood was shaken by an emergency call that would soon make national headlines. A young mother, Bianella Susanna, dialed 911 in a panic. Her 2-year-old son, David, was unconscious. When first responders arrived, they immediately noticed something was terribly wrong. David wasn't breathing. His small body was covered in bruises, and worst of all, he had a massive skull fracture. Doctors rushed him into emergency care, but the damage was too severe. David passed away the next day. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma. Not a fall, not an accident, but a deliberate blow. Investigators began asking questions, and what they found next was almost unthinkable. the person responsible wasn't an adult. It was David's 12-year-old half-brother, Cristian Fernandez. Detectives say Cristian admitted to pushing his toddler brother into a bookshelf, hard enough to cause the fatal head injury. But instead of calling for help right away, he laid the baby on a bed and covered him with a blanket, then walked away. To most people, Cristian looked like a small, quiet boy. But his childhood had already been a nightmare. Born to a 12-year-old mother and a 24-year-old father, Cristian was surrounded by chaos from birth. His mother, Bianella, struggled with drugs and abuse, and his stepfather was later arrested for violently assaulting Cristian, once even breaking his arm. By age 8, Cristian had been through more trauma than most adults could imagine. Teachers described him as intelligent, polite, but emotionally detached, the kind of child who seemed older than his years. After his arrest, prosecutors faced a moral dilemma that would divide the country. Should a 12-year-old who killed his brother be treated like a child or like a cold-blooded killer? Florida State Attorney Angela Corey decided to try him as an adult, charging him with first-degree murder. The news shocked the nation. Images of the small boy, barely tall enough to reach the defense table, appeared on every TV station across America. To many, it looked like the justice system had gone too far. Section 7. Lionel Tate, the 12-year-old sentenced to life in prison. This is Lionel Tate, a name that shocked America back in 1999, when he became the youngest person in U.S. history to be sentenced to life in prison without parole. It all started in Broward County, Florida, when 12-year-old Lionel was left at home under the supervision of his mother, who was babysitting a 6-year-old girl named Tiffany Unick. The two were reportedly playing in the living room when things took a tragic turn. Lionel's mother said she went upstairs for a few minutes, and when she came back down, Tiffany was lying motionless on the floor. At first, Lionel told police they were play fighting, imitating moves he'd seen on professional wrestling shows. But medical examiners quickly ruled that Tiffany's injuries were far from accidental. Her body showed signs of severe beating, fractures, and a lacerated liver, injuries consistent with a violent attack, not child's play. Prosecutors charged Lionel with first-degree murder, and because of Florida's tough laws at the time, he was tried as an adult. At just 14 years old, he was convicted and given a mandatory life sentence. No parole, no leniency. The decision sparked outrage across the country. Many questioned how a child barely in middle school could possibly understand the magnitude of his actions or the punishment he was facing. Human rights groups, psychologists, and even the governor of Florida criticized the ruling, calling it a failure of justice and compassion. In the years that followed, Lionel's legal team appealed the decision. They argued he wasn't competent to stand trial, that he didn't truly understand the charges against him. After spending 3 years in prison, his conviction was overturned in 2004, and he was released under strict probation. But Lionel's story didn't end there. Just a year later, he was arrested again for robbing a pizza delivery man at gunpoint. He was sent back to prison for violating his probation, this time as a grown man, fully aware of his choices. Today, Lionel Tate remains a haunting example of how early violence and poor judgment can destroy young lives, and how the justice system sometimes struggles to know where childhood ends and accountability begins. Each of these kids made a choice, some out of anger, some out of fear, some without even understanding the meaning of death. The court said they were old enough to know better. The world said they were too young to lose their lives to the system. But in every case, the damage was done. A life was lost, and another was taken away forever. These stories remind us that justice isn't always black and white. Sometimes it's gray, tragic, and hauntingly human. Court moments where justice meets reality.